My name is Wendy Patrick. I am a career prosecutor out of San Diego. I'm going to have an opportunity to introduce my panelists in the program in just a minute, but I have just a few housekeeping matters that I would like to get out of the way. This is a non-CLE accredited program. Why is that important? Because that's one less email you have to send after the program asking for your CLE accreditation. However, I would argue that using artificial intelligence in the practice of law is a valuable way to spend an hour, regardless of getting a certificate at the end. We are going to be looking for your questions, not in the chat, but in the Q&A function. And we're going to take turns monitoring that so we can see if anything comes up that's relevant as each of us is speaking. This program is also being recorded and will be available on the ABA's YouTube channel if you want to replay your favorite parts of it or watch it again to see what you missed. So you will have that opportunity. All right, let me introduce a little bit about the subject matter for today. So you'll notice the catchy title, Digital Witness, the Legal Frontier of Artificial Intelligence Evidence. I have to say, since we have started teaching, we lawyers, judges, AI practitioners, just a few years ago, this technology has absolutely exploded. Think through what your favorite AI tool was as recently as 2 years ago, if you had a favorite back then. And I'm willing to bet you have greatly expanded your horizons between then and now because you have so much to choose from. It is one of those areas of the law that is just ripe for ethics opinions, for practice pointers, for practical application, and everything in between. And as we work through this together as a team, there's going to be 3 of us that you're going to be hearing from. As we work through it as a team, no doubt it's going to really expand the way perhaps you think about the way in which you may be able to use it in the practice of law. And that's true because remember, it's not only available to be used substantively to either save you time, to do compiling, to do searching, all the different things that it does. But as I'm going to be talking a little bit about near the end of the program, it is a dynamite brainstorming tool where you will never have to cite it for anything, but instead, if you're like me and you like working very late at night, it is somebody with whom you can bounce around ideas and never have to worry about hallucinating because there's no such thing as a bad idea. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to do just a brief introduction of the panelists. I mentioned earlier, I'm a career prosecutor. I'm also a jury and trial consultant, which means I do an enormous amount of training. And yes, I do an enormous amount of training on how to, not if, but how to use artificial intelligence in your practice ethically and effectively. And I would even say, you know, that's a program in flux because there are new ways, new programs, new artificial intelligent assistants to choose from all of the time. You're also going to hear from one of my peers. You're going to hear from the elected state attorney in the 17th Judicial Circuit, Harold Pryor. And yes, that's Broward County. I was joking with him ahead of time that an enormous amount of high-profile cases come out of Broward County. So I'm looking forward to his segment of the program. But we're going to start off with my dear friend Brent. Brent and I have presented together before, and I'm going to turn it over to Brent Berkeley, who's the Director of Strategic Relationships for Axon, to sort of kick us off with what this new technology looks like as a practical matter to give you some idea as to how to use these brave new tools. Take it away, Brent.
All right. Thank you, Wendy, and good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are here. I will say I am in Kansas City, Missouri, and I just got a notice that some big thunderstorms are crashing through. So if by chance that impacts my internet or power and I just disappear, I'll be back as soon as I can. But hopefully that won't happen. So like Wendy said, my name is Brent Berkeley, currently the Director of Strategic Relationships at Axon. I'm sure many of you are aware of Axon as a company and maybe our customers and maybe using some of our tools. I will say this, in my capacity here today, I'm not here to give you a sales pitch about Axon's solutions or products or AI tools or anything like that. I'm here to talk more in general but as one of the major producers of AI tools for law enforcement, prosecution, and the criminal justice community, including public and private defense attorneys. I was asked to be part of this. I will briefly mention some of the things we have, but we are not in any way, shape, or form the only vendor of AI tools for legal practice that's out there. So what I do want to talk about, though, is a bit of a history of kind of where we got to where we are today. And I was talking with Wendy and a few others prior to the webinar, and I feel somewhat, blessed or privileged to be of a certain generation in that over my nearly 35-year career, I've been able to see a number of inflection points for technology and the growth of technology from a purely analog profession. When I graduated from law school, everything was on paper. We had to go back through the pocket parts and pull the books off the shelves and all of those sorts of things. And in fact, when I was a 3L, this newfangled thing called Westlaw first came out, and all the professors were like, yeah, you might want to learn this, but it's probably not going to be that important. Obviously, we know where that went. And as a result of that, I'll talk about a few more of these inflection points, but I want to ask the question and just sort of think about this as we go through is like, what is technology? And technology is often considered to be something that's like bright and shiny and sci-fi and computerized, and that's sort of the kind of the context in which we look at technology today. But really, technology is anything that we create that makes our lives more efficient, makes us more effective at the jobs and the activities and the tasks that we have to do. And we've been doing this since our ancestors, tamed fire, millions of years ago. So with that in mind, let's take a look at kind of where we are today. And I would dare say many of us still have a room somewhere in our office, regardless of whether we work for a government agency or private defense or, private civil law. You've probably got a room or a drawer in your desk that looks very much like this. I still do. In the desk behind me, I've got a whole bunch of flash drives, and oddly enough, I have like some CDs still there, but I can't read them. I can't use them. And I am brought back to the sort of the time when I first started as a criminal justice practitioner. And for probably the first 3 years of my career, every photograph that I introduced as evidence had been taken on film. And when the transition, I was into my prosecutor career at that time, when the transition to digital photography happened, I remember there was a bit of a panic. I know for me personally, and also for my colleagues around the state, there was some concern and some panic of how are we going to prove authenticity? How are we going to prove that this hasn't been manipulated? How are we going to lay foundation and respond to are we going to have to do a Fry hearing or a Daubert hearing on digital photography? And I remember that kind of concern and that panic a little bit, but I also remember what we did, and that is we lawyered our way through it. And there were some challenges, there were some things we did, but now there's no question. In fact, I haven't heard of a film taken photograph being admitted as evidence in quite some time now. This, then later eventually changed. There've been different inflection points over the years, and one is what about email communication, which was a difference between writing a letter and mailing it, or then writing a letter and faxing it, and then writing a message and emailing it. All of those things created new legal challenges that we had to deal with as practitioners in the field, and we lawyered our way through it. It happened again when everything moved from local storage to the cloud. Same thing. How do we prove chain of custody? How do we prove, who's accessed it and that it's a true and correct copy of the item that we're alleging that it is? We lawyered our way through that. The influx of body camera video for law enforcement changed dramatically the way that prosecutors present case, changed dramatically the way that defense attorneys defended their clients and presented cases, in court when there's body camera video about the interaction between the police and the citizen. So we've had these inflection points for a number of years or a number of times over the years. And I think we're at another one now. And we're at a point that I think is going to be an even more dramatic inflection point than, moving from film to digital photography or moving from local storage to cloud storage. Because whereas cloud storage, as opposed to local storage, does have some foundational questions, it does have some concerns about authenticity and security in that. AI is such a broader tool, and it can in some ways, sort of replace the activities and enhance the activities that the people, the trained lawyers, the trained legal professionals are doing. And so it creates additional ethical concerns. But let's get a little bit into the history of artificial intelligence. And it starts all the way back like in 1950 with Alan Turing from, the whole Enigma machine thing. Uh, Ask the question of, can machines learn? And then we get into the whole, coining of the term artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence has progressed over the years, and we have used it throughout our lives, in many ways. And in fact, if you kind of go back and you realize that we've been using artificial intelligence for weather prediction since the 1970s. We've been using it for air travel and traffic control and things of that since easily the 80s and 90s. So it's been around for a long time, but having these tools that are more accessible to an individual, whether it's a consumer or whether it's in your job as a government lawyer, uh, the increase in this, like Wendy was saying, even a couple of years ago when I would ask our customers, when do we think AI is going to be a big deal in prosecution or defense work? Everybody would say, well, it's coming. It's 5 years from now. It's 10 years from now. But about 2 years ago, it just exploded. There's a number of reasons behind that, why it has exploded so exponentially over the last couple of years, but it is here. And I think because of that, it's one of these things that, just like we did with digital photography and cloud storage, et cetera, we have to lawyer our way through it. And so understanding what it is, what it isn't, how to use it, and how to evaluate the tools that you may or may not use in your office is very important for making sure that you are abiding by your ethical responsibilities, either as a prosecutor or to your clients as a defense attorney. So a couple of things here, just hopefully you've had a chance to look at this slide, is that AI is hiding in plain sight, and we've been using it, pretty much all the time for a number of years now. Spell check. Now, granted, that's a very primitive form of AI, but it really is. I have a challenge for whatever reason. I can't spell the word friend. And so whenever I type it, spell check pretty much always corrects me. Grammar check, predictive text, all of the suggestions that you get when you open Amazon or if you open any of your socials, be it Instagram or TikTok or whatever it might be, you're going to be fed content based on an algorithm, which is artificial intelligence. And then, of course, you've got the things that we use on our phones all the day, be it Siri, Copilot, um, Gemini, ChatGPT, any of these other efficiency tools that we utilize on a day-to-day basis. I would dare say that you have interacted with an artificial intelligence at least a dozen times just today. All right, but let's look at the difference, if we will, as far as the benefits for public safety. When you look at it from the perception of like law enforcement, there are a lot of tools that are out there, be it tools to help draft police narratives, be it tools to help with redaction and identification of license plates from ALPR tools. There are a lot of tools that are out there that increase the investigative capacity and effectiveness of law enforcement agencies. But also can create some issues downstream when that information gets shared initially to the prosecutor and then through the discovery process to the defense counsel. It creates issues of, is this real? Was this AI generated? Was this AI assisted? How was this investigation conducted? And what parts of that process were aided, assisted, or driven by an artificial intelligence? So the tools are great. The tools are very powerful. However, we need to make sure that we're taking the proper look at this and understanding what it is, what it isn't, and where it's coming from. And then when you get to the, sort of the lawyer side of things, I sometimes feel like we're, like some ancient civilization trying to figure out a computer, because as a rule, I do believe that the practice of law is a very traditionalist perspective or profession. We love the books, we love the paper, we love sort of, I think some of us want to go back to the days of the wigs and the robes, right? So technology has been slow to advance within the legal community, but we are now at another one of those inflection points where we have to adopt it. I know there's a lot of ethical rules, and I think Wendy will talk about this later about a duty of technological competence, and I think that's very critical. But to go back to my comments a few minutes ago about all of the AI tools that we're using on a daily basis, like ChatGPT or Alexa or whatever it might be, we have to recognize that there is a difference in AI tools, whether they're GPTs or otherwise, that are made for the general public, that are there to make a profit, and then also those that are made for criminal justice, regardless of what side you're on. And that's sort of where one of the things I really want to sort of like focus on for the next little bit is those like OpenAI, ChatGPT, the Meta AIs, and a number of other things out there. They're great tools, but they're not designed for you. They're not designed for you as a criminal justice practitioner. And in fact, one of the things I like to say, if you're not paying for an AI tool, then that tool is not the product, you're the product, because it's the data, the information, your prompting habits, your browsing habits that those companies like Meta or others are using to sort of sell that data for advertising and things like that. So any tool that you're not paying for, and keep in mind, artificial intelligence solutions are very process heavy. They're very expensive to sort of create and to run. So if you're not paying for one, then you're the product, not the tool itself. So in any tool that you're using, and this would include Axon's tools or LexisNexis or Westlaw or any other vendor that's out there, you should be asking what their AI philosophy is, how they are developing their AI tools, and the way that your data is structured and managed and shared or not shared. So this is Axon's AI philosophy, which is not that dissimilar from many others that are in the public safety, criminal justice, legal space. But we look at it from the perspective of any tool that we make should enhance and extend the capabilities of public safety professionals while seeking feedback from a wide variety of stakeholders. And one of the things that I feel is most important is incorporating safeguards to preserve human decision making. We want to minimize the use and sharing of sensitive data and rigorously measure performance and bias. That's one of the big concerns with sort of commercial, non-specific AI tools, is that your data, your sensitive data, your client information, or if you're a prosecutor, your CJIS information about victims and witnesses just goes up to the cloud in general, which obviously violates a number of regulations and rules and ethical considerations. But it's also just unsafe. So you need to understand, what does this tool, what is the underlying development strategy of these vendors that are providing tools for you. One of the things you'll run into a lot is the phrase that there should be a human in the loop for any decision-making process. I've started to look at this from the perspective, it should be human in control. An AI tool should be a tool. It should be there to make things easier for you. It should be there to make you more efficient and more effective. If you're looking for something that, like sort of condenses and sorts and analyzes massive amounts of data that's out there, you want it to be able to find that needle in a haystack for you, right? It's not going to tell you that it's the right needle or that needle is fit for purpose, but it will say, here's a needle, rather than having to either burn down the whole haystack to find your needle or sort through it bit by bit. That's what it can do, and that's what it can be really good at. And so our goal on this is to enhance productivity, reduce these time-consuming tasks by creating quality work product, so that you can get your lawyers and your staff back to doing those things that they're trained for and that people need to do. Make those considerations, advise your clients, advise victims and witnesses, and then make those arguments to the court. If you're spending all of your time sorting through terabytes and terabytes of data and information, and you don't get the opportunity to condense and argue those, that's where the AI tools can come into play for you. Because overall, we want to be able to improve your value to the community that you serve, regardless of where that is. And again, I'm coming close on my time, so and I don't want to take any time away from my fellow presenters here. So I just want to, this is some of the tools that Axon provides, as well as other vendors provide similar tools from like transcription, translation, redaction tools for both video and audio. We've got a new one that's coming out in just like a week or two called Brief One that summarizes, videos and cases. All of these are available, not just from us, but there's a number of other tools from other vendors as well. And again, this one we're pretty excited about, Axon's Brief One that comes out in a couple of weeks. So with that in mind, that's just very much a brief sort of summary and overview of kind of where we are now and how we got there. And I want to turn it over to my friend Harold Pryor, who's the elected state attorney in Broward County, to talk about some of the leadership aspects that you need to look at from an AI perspective. So, Harold?
All right. Thank you, Brent, for that handoff. Just a brief introduction of who I am. My name is Harold Pryor. I'm the elected state attorney in Broward County. Just to give you some geographical ID or location of where we are, we're in South Florida. We're the county north of Miami-Dade and the county south of Palm Beach. We are the second largest prosecutorial jurisdiction in the state of Florida. We have about 2.1 million residents that live in Broward County. I have an office of about 511 employees, and of those employees, about 215 are attorneys. We have about 30,000 cases in our jurisdiction, and so part of my job, I'm tasked with ensuring that we have all the resources and tools that we need to adequately do our jobs, but also to competently do our jobs, but to be efficient as we carry out our primary goal, which is to seek justice, which is in Broward County. And so my concerns, and I think all of our concerns with generative AI or any form of AI, is really just the accuracy and reliability of the information or items that we may take from that. Also, the potential biases and errors that we might find, as well as developing policies to combat against some of those concerns that I just mentioned and that Brent went over in his original presentation. And so we'll start with the first point for me, and that is there is no substitute for the human touch or the human feel to things, especially what we do in prosecution when we're dealing with the public safety, but also a potential of someone or an individual that comes in contact with the criminal justice system losing their liberty. And so that's an important thing. And so that's what we impart upon our attorneys as we have this conversation, as we train, and as we develop policies to really navigate this new world, this new age of AI. And we have to adapt. And I think Brent talked about it, and I think it was a great presentation of the historical context of technology and the legal system. We have to learn, we have to adapt, we have to develop policies and safeguards to protect ourselves, but also protect the people that come in contact with the criminal justice system or the practice of law in general. And so the first point, the first slide that I really want to go to and I want to talk about is there's obviously regulations regarding the use of AI, and also obviously there's training that goes along with that. And so I can only talk about the context of Florida because I practice in Florida. But in January of last year, the Florida Bar convened the committee to research and to do a study and to come up with a recommendation how to deal with generative AI in our jurisdiction in the state of Florida. And so as a result of that committee, they issued an ethics opinion, and that ethics opinion is 24-1. And so that ethics opinion, it addressed issues of confidentiality, legal fees and costs, oversight of generative AI, and also lawyer advertising. And so for purposes of this presentation and what we're talking about in the context of prosecution is really also confidentiality and the oversight of generative AI. And so my office, first and foremost, we use AI tools with Westlaw Edge, Precision, and Lexis AI. And also we utilize Axon Justice that offers great services and tools to help our prosecutors to deal with the voluminous number of discovery and our ongoing discovery obligation here in this jurisdiction. And so every tool is needed at their disposal so they can move through the evidence and information that they have to disclose during the discovery phase of a prosecution. And all of you know, and we all know, that body-worn cameras has added an extra element there, more time in going through that discovery. And so we have to use every tool at our disposal to make sure that they can get through that information, get that discovery out in an adequate time, 15 days, pursuant to the rule here in the state of Florida. And so we use tools. However, we've only limited really to the use of research, analysis, and also assisting us in going through evidence. We prohibit its use for drafting of legal documents or correspondences because we have a constitutional obligation in the state of Florida that victims be heard and seen through every stage of the prosecutorial process. So we try to limit the automation of certain correspondences and things that go out to our victims that are involved in cases. But we also prohibit the use of AI during trial. Believe it or not, my prosecutors have identified cases and situations where defense attorneys have used apps like ChatGPT to draft their cross-examination or direct examinations, and attorneys, they've been willing to, or they've actually been transparent in saying that, yeah, we've utilized that in trial as defense attorneys to help us generate questions, right? We prohibit that use on our side, on the prosecution side. And so we can go to the next slide, but I want to talk about what we utilize AI for. And then I'll go into the Florida Bar Membership Survey. So as part of the committee, actually, we'll go to that because I want to talk about that because I think it's just interesting. And I think it'd be good for us to know. The Florida Bar commissioned a survey as a part of this committee to find out, okay, what are attorneys in the Florida Bar, what are they utilizing AI for? And so when you looked at the study, 80% of those surveyed, whether or not they're telling the truth, 80% of those who were surveyed said that they do not use generative AI, but 11% of them responded and said that they frequently or occasionally use ChatGPT. And then when they did a further breakdown of those who actually reported using AI, 11% said they use it for legal research and analysis, 5% for drafting documents, 4% for case analysis, and for another 4% for summarizing documents, right? And then you see here the aspect of automated client communication, which, you know, I think it's dangerous. I think it's a little dicey there because whenever you have a constitutional obligation like we do in the state of Florida to maintain contact with victims, we try to regulate that. We have a policy where we ensure that our prosecutors are having human-on-human interaction, contact, and really ensuring that they know who their prosecutor is and that they've had an actual live conversation with a human being, because that's important. But when you look at Rule 24.1 or the opinion, it broke it down into two phases. One, and so they said that irrespective if you're a civil practitioner, irrespective if you're a prosecution office, there are two things that you need to pay attention to, right? And two questions that you really need to ask and understand. With reference to confidentiality, in 24.1 in the Florida's opinion, you have to ask the question, is the AI program self-learning, right? And I think Brent touched on this earlier because we have an obligation to keep certain information confidential, right? Whether it be a victim, whether it be sensitive information, whether a victim or witness is a part of a protected class, whether you have a child that may be involved, we can't provide children's information in there. And so we have to be careful when you allow AI programs to utilize your case management system, because one, it could be in violation of CJIS compliance, not CJIS compliant. It could violate all the rules and prohibitions there. But also you have to understand that there are certain things that are confidential that you don't want disclosed, that cannot be disclosed. And so if you have an AI program that's self-learning, well, all it does is, yes, it's going to provide information. Yes, it's going to help you in automating certain aspects. Yes, it can help you generate documents, but is it also collecting information? Is it storing that information into its system and self-learning? So then it can become a better AI system that can generate documents a lot more accurately. Well, that's great for everyone else involved. However, if you have CJIS compliance obligation, If you have criminal justice information that you cannot provide, that you're not supposed to disclose, you have to be careful about that. And so the onus is on you as a leader of a criminal justice agency or even a law firm to ensure that you're asking those important questions and that you're properly vetting whatever AI system or programming that you're utilizing. For example, we utilize Axon. Axon is CJIS compliance, and it's also compliant in our state. And so they are cognizant of these issues. Brent is cognizant of those issues because he's a prosecutor. He's a former prosecutor. And so he understands those concerns. And so you have to properly vet the companies and agencies that you utilize for AI programming and be mindful of whether or not it's a self-learning system, okay? Next, in 24.1, and I think all of this is applicable across any jurisdiction, is when you look at how you treat these AI programming. So if you pick an AI program, you decide this is the AI program we're going to utilize, or this is the software we're going to utilize, but it has an AI component to it, you have to treat it like a non-lawyer assistant. You have to treat it like you treat your paralegals or legal assistants, meaning you need to vet everything that is generated by an AI system. Treat it like a legal assistant or like a paralegal. Whenever they're drafting your subpoenas, whenever they're working on basic motions or documents that might be filed with the court, you have an obligation to monitor that. You will be put on the hook if there's something done unethical or if something doesn't actually meet the standard. And so you have to properly vet that. And so you have to treat an AI system just like you would a non-lawyer assistant. And that's what the Florida opinion advised. And so you have to vet everything that's generated by these AI systems. And so you have to develop policies, you have to review this work product, and you have to come up with safeguards to vet the accuracy and the sufficiency of whatever's produced by these AI generated systems. And so that's going to the practical aspect of what we deal with. Axon Justice provides a great service, a great tool that we utilize, but I know there's other AI generator programs that are incorporated in other case management systems or tools regarding body worn camera or evidence that may be uploaded into a system. And so some of the things that AI is utilized for is generating reports with some of the law enforcement agencies around the country, transcription of particular records, and also translation of certain video, audio, in various different languages. And so we rely on transcriptions of records. We rely on some of those translations, but also redactions. You can utilize some of these systems for redactions. But once again, it goes back to my office policy, right? And our office policy is, and I think it's consistent across the board with what Brent has said, what I'm representing, and I submit, and I know that Wendy Patrick will present to you. AI should only be utilized as a tool. It shouldn't be utilized as a crutch, or something that's going to generate some form of an opinion or draft a document. And if you do rely on it to do such a thing, you need to properly vet it. You have to have safeguards to vet it. And so for me, we don't allow our attorneys to use generative AI to doctor up documents, to formulate opinions, to direct us in our course of action and whatever we do, because I happen to believe that there is an overwhelming potential for biases. There's always going to be a potential for errors. There's always going to be errors there, even if a human being is involved, and even with AI. And so what we notice with the redactions, if there's a redaction of particular documents and there's sensitive information like a victim's name, social security number, address, you name it, those are things that these AI systems are great at identifying and redacting, but like anything else, it can miss certain aspects. And so that's why it's incumbent upon the attorneys in my office to follow our policy and to ensure that they're vetting all these documents once they're generated. So if a redaction is done by a particular AI software, they are instructed to review and vet those redactions, and then they can catch those redactions and add to those redactions if they see that in those particular documents. Next, we have the transcription of records. Look, this is one of my favorite ones because I don't care. It could be the best and top rated AI software system in the world, and the top AI generating system in the criminal justice realm. there's always going to be errors, right? And sometimes it doesn't catch some of the things. Like, for example, nonverbal cues. We've all practiced law here. We've done depositions. We've gone to trial. We've done evidentiary hearings, and we understand that there are some nonverbal cues, some things that AI is just not going to catch. It's not going to catch those nonverbal cues or nonverbalized information that only you can catch if it's face-to-face human interaction. And so you have to be mindful of that with these translations. And with these transcriptions as well, it's like hallucinations, right? Sometimes it can make jumps, right? Logical jumps, because it's combining all the different types of situations and scenarios that happen in similarly situated occurrences that may have happened in that particular jurisdiction. And it just makes a logical leap to the actual software system. But when you look at the facts and situations to that particular case, to that particular matter, it's illogical. It's a leap, therefore it's a hallucination. And so you have to be careful for anything that's being generated by AI, because that's a real danger. That's a real danger. That's a real concern. And so with these transcriptions, you have to be careful. You have to train your office and they have to have an understanding that, look, you're not to rely solely on those translations, because sometimes those translations, they miss the context of how certain things are verbalized. It may misspell certain words, certain vernaculars. I'm from the South, right? I grew up in Florida. I grew up in the northern part of Florida. It's Alabama or Georgia. Just take your pick, right? And the way I might say a certain word might be different from someone that may have grown up in New York or New Jersey or in the Midwest. And sometimes the translations doesn't get the correct spelling of the particular word that's being uttered by the subject or the individual in which it's trying to translate the conversation, the statement that may have been done or collected on a body-worn camera, or may have been recorded by the particular law enforcement officer. And so you have to be careful of that. And so that's why it's important that you also listen to those video or audio recordings, but also you can utilize AI generated transcriptions to help you read through those documents. I think it's useful. I find it highly useful. My attorneys find it highly useful, particularly my case filers, and they just utilize it as a tool. But you can't solely rely on AI generated reports, whether it be translations, whether it be transcriptions, whether it be redactions. And so final aspect of that and the final piece to that is, in my office, we provide trainings, and at the conclusion of those trainings, whether you're going to use Westlaw Precision, whether you're going to use the Lexis tool, whether you're going to use Axon, we have our attorneys sign a disclosure. They have to sign a form saying that they received the training and that they're not going to solely rely on these AI generated reports, no matter they be redactions, transcriptions, translations, you name it. That they are going to do their due diligence to be in compliance with the Florida Bar rule or opinion regarding the use of generative AI, and that they're going to do their due diligence in vetting whatever's generated by an AI program or software. And so those are the components that we really focus on and we're really concerned about, and that's the accuracy, that's the reliability, that's the potential biases and errors that could be a byproduct of using these programs, and also ensuring that we have policies in place to protect the citizens of Broward County, but also our attorneys who come in contact, because we don't want them sacrificing their bar license or their livelihoods because they're not doing their due diligence and they're not vetting these programs properly. And so with that said, so we can have time to allow Wendy Patrick to do her presentation, to go into the ethics in utilizing generative AI or different softwares in the practice of law. And then after Wendy's presentation, I'm hopeful that we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A and to answer some of your questions. Wendy?
Thank you very much, Harold. That was fascinating. You know, I'm going to just sort of pick up on some of the themes that you hit. One of those themes has to do with the intersection between the ethics of using AI and the practical considerations, because when we really think about how we use it, a lot of us don't use it as much as we would like to because we're not familiar with how to use it more efficiently and ethically. It's sort of that gray area where it's a better idea to do your own work unless you already are familiar with ways that we do use AI. And generative AI is different than simply saying, oh, I'm going to automate a system. You know, we all spell check, we all do a search function to look for words in a document. We get a little more nervous when we are thinking about turning over larger volumes of data to artificial machines and thinking that they're going to vet it properly, which is one of the reasons that if I were to identify a trend ethically, as I have combed through absolutely countless numbers of opinions and articles and ideas over the last several years, the one I would probably come up with is you have to be responsible for your own work. So you're always going to have to review what AI has done. Now, some lawyers have said, well, how is that markedly different from reviewing a law clerk's work? And in some sense, maybe it's not, except that a law clerk is likely citing cases, and we've all seen some of the very embarrassing, high profile, headline grabbing incidents from around the nation where AI has, as they say, hallucinated. In other words, made something up in an attempt to help you find what you want to find. And I've done a lot of research into what exactly is a hallucination? How does it happen? And one of the common themes there is it seems like AI will look for patterns. It'll look for words next to each other. It'll try to be helpful in finding different rhythms of words that seem to come up and then crafting something that appears to be responsive to a query, only to realize that only is not a real case, but that's not what it says. So we have a little bit higher of a burden in the legal field when it comes to reviewing the work that somebody else did. One of the very foundations, however, before I go through a couple of slides here, one of the very basic foundations in using AI legally and ethically is that you have to know how it works. Now, you don't have to be an expert on it in your own right. That's one of the reasons, you know, we hire expert witnesses to testify in court. But you have to associate with somebody to where they're able to answer the questions you have. What's the data set? Is it a closed universe or an open universe? Is it combing the internet in real time, or is it limited to anything between these two particular dates? As I'm going to be talking about as we go through this, the ethical realm, I'm also going to be reminding all of us that AI can only find what's out there on the internet and what's available digitally and electronically. If there was a great interview done on one of your cold cases 30 years ago and it's written down in a basement somewhere, AI won't find it because nobody's put it in a fashion that AI would be able to see it. You can see it if you go down to the courtroom basement, as I used to have to do when I was a brand new deputy public defender back in the day, but you won't see it if you're only using generative AI. So those are some of the foundations as we move through. Brent, let's go to the next slide, and this is going to characterize where we are now in using AI. We're using it to enhance case investigation. We're also using it to technologically enhance case presentation. And right away, if any of you are thinking competence, Rule 1.1, you are on the right track. We always start at Rule 1.1 competence. Many of these rules I'm going to be talking about are the same virtually in almost every single state. There are some rules we have, confidentiality being one of them, 1.6, that are sometimes markedly different state to state. But because I know all of you are from all over the US, I am going to generalize when I already know, because I've looked, there is a rule like competence that is very, very similar. So when it comes to competence, many of our rules have embraced the idea of making sure you're also competent as it comes to new technologies, new evidence code sections that incorporate electronic evidence, and new ways in which we use technology in both investigating and then preparing and showcasing our cases in the courtroom. But let's go to the next slide for the honeymoon that we find ourselves in right now. We are in the honeymoon phase of artificial intelligence. It is new, it's exciting. We have sort of a romantic allure in thinking about how much easier it is asking questions to an AI technology than it is through going through a Google Drive where all you get are ads from other people's law firms. You can't even find an article or, God forbid, a summary of whatever question you're asking because it's just showing you content. But That's not true if you research through AI. And you might think, well, isn't the content going to be riskier if I only use AI? Well, I don't know nowadays with all of the internet-based misinformation that we hear about on the news, whether or not it's not going to be close. But I am optimistic. And part of the reason I like to cite this as a honeymoon phase is many of us are finding out that AI is correct in a lot of the miscellaneous information it gives us. Everything from, what's the longest plane flight? A question I asked it not too long ago as I flew back and forth to Singapore, and it sure seemed like that was a lot of hours to me. Or whether you're asking whether there are any new dinner restaurants in your area, or whether you're asking about what modern jurors care about the most in a politically charged atmosphere when it comes to credibility of prosecutors and police officers. So these are some of the ways in which we are enjoying the way that artificial intelligence is making our life easier. The one caveat I always have if you're asking anything case related is you better make sure you know exactly what your office policy says you can and can't do. You want to make sure that you're aware of what kind of programs you are and aren't allowed to install on your government laptops and your government cell phone. And you also want to make sure that it's never a bad idea to check to see if those policies have changed. Because when it comes to new technologies, we are works in progress, individually and collectively, as we seek together to try to figure out how we can use artificial intelligence to make our jobs easier. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea as to how some of us think about artificial intelligence, and then we really have to segue into how we use it in prosecution work and how we use it in legal work. And no, I'm not talking about falling in love with an algorithm or an operating system like in the movie Her, and I'm sure there's been many other movies that have talked about the same thing. But we really enjoy having it help us see things differently. So just as a personal example, this was my backyard a month ago. And I thought, I wonder what my backyard would look like if I kind of do the home improvement tropical flower idea that I've been thinking through. So with the really about 20 seconds, voila, let's look at the next slide, Brent. Here you go. This is what my backyard pretty much looks like now. This was the artificial intelligence rendering, but it labeled every single flower and where I could buy it and how much it cost, which allowed me to actually get the project done in a fraction of the time. So let's move forward now, Brent, and let's see how that kind of ease translates legally into what we think of as digital competence. Remember, we're still on Rule 1.1 competence. Here's the scary thing about AI in terms of the two tasks that it does. One of the things I also have done is an enormous amount of research as to how AI can be ethically used in the criminal justice realm. And one of the earliest studies that came out from 2020 is they talked about jobs that benefit from AI falling into one of two categories: performing tasks or making decisions. Now, if we were live, I would say, which one of those two do you feel more comfortable with? And I'm going to guess almost all of you would have said performing tasks rather than making decisions. And let's go to the next slide to illustrate why that would probably still be what you would say today. Let me ask you, in terms of how AI makes decisions, when you are having a conversation with one of your colleagues in one office and you're discussing a topic and you go back to your own office and you pull up a browser, and on your browser, you're very quickly getting ads that relate to the topic you were discussing in your colleague's office. Who wants to tell me how that works? Now, I don't know whether you guys are blowing up the Q&A function with answers. Maybe you all know. If you had your smartphone with you in your colleague's office, we could probably guess how it happened. Now, I hope that it doesn't happen if you don't have your smartphone, because then we're all really in trouble. Then it's obviously taken on a life of its own. But most of the time, we can tie it to having our technology close enough to hear what we've been talking about. Now, I know some people that say, hey, that's great, optimized ads. It saves me time, saves me money. Actually, I do get ads for things that I'm looking at. I know others that value their privacy and are terrified of the reality that AI somehow listens and then tries to help you out when you are researching or at least expressing an interest in something in particular. But the bottom line ethically is we don't really know how AI learns as it works with you more frequently. If you use the same AI program, whether it's Gemini, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it is Westlaw or Lexis AI, which I personally don't find half as valuable as doing your own queries, but that's just me. Maybe some of you can give me some practice pointers. Maybe there are better search terms. But if we don't exactly know how AI is making its decisions, at least until you figure out that component, you need to be doing that research yourself. Okay, so let's move on and see some of the biggest concerns here. One more click, and I'm going to give you an idea of what I mean by this. Aha, there it is. This is what my office used to look like in the 90s when I was a brand new prosecutor. I'd be in court all day long and I would come back, and this is what I would come back to. New cases, my chair was piled so high with them I couldn't sit down. Had AI been around back then, I would have said, give me the need for speed. I need to have some way of triaging all these new police reports and fact patterns that have come in since I have spent the morning cross-examining the defendant. We don't think any differently today, because not only have caseloads not necessarily decreased, but the only thing that has decreased is the amount of personnel in an office sometimes. And Harold will probably say the same thing as an elected, is it is tough doing more with less. And we often sometimes think about how AI may make our lives easier if we know how to harness it effectively and ethically. And now, in case you haven't figured it out, I'm talking about diligence rule 1.3. Rule 1.3 diligence basically says you have to work with enough speed and diligence where you are not asking for continuances. I'm paraphrasing. You're not asking for continuances. You're getting things done on time. You're meeting deadlines, and you're able to do it with the diligence that is necessary for each case. Now, your different states' discussion sections and comment sections, as well as the ABA, have broken that down into areas that really value not carrying caseloads that you can't manage. Now, not every state says this, but the fact that language like that is in the ABA should strike fear into all of us. Because remember, all of our states have some kind of case law or caveat near the beginning of our ethical codes that basically says if you have an ethics question that's not directly addressed in your state's ethical rules, you are invited to look elsewhere for guidance. That means we can look at each other's ethical opinions and codes. We can certainly look at the ABA, what their codes and opinions are talking about. And I'm going to share one of the most relevant ABA ethics opinions on AI with you in a moment. But the need for speed, the rule of diligence, is one of those areas where we are glad that we have somewhere else to look, because we want to know how to use it safely to do the kinds of things that frees us up for the legal analysis that we were hired to perform. All right, let's do the next slide, and let's think about this a little more in terms of more than a weapon of mass deception, as I say. This is one of the 2023 bits of research that came out that just fascinated me. It recognizes the use of technology as a tool, and it talks about it being human-centered. Now, why is that important? That's important because if you're using it, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of go through the different ways in which you can be creative, this is the type of thing you can use ChatGPT for. But Brent, go to the next slide, and I'm going to sort of queue up this ethical opinion 512 before we go into a little brief Q&A session here at the end. But if I were to give you a clearinghouse of ethical rules that are implicated by the use of AI, all I have to do is go just last year to ABA Formal Opinion 512. Now, there are also, not just in Harold's state of Florida, but there are many states that have generated their own AI opinions. And if you're in one of those states, or even if you're not, it is never a bad idea to read through these ethics opinions, because each of them uses a hypothetical scenario that may mirror something that you are tackling. Now, how do I know? Because one of the hats that I have worn is chair of the California State Bar Ethics Ethics Committee, which is called COPRAC. And many of us who have chaired COPRAC can tell you that is the primary thing that we do. And if any of you have chaired Your state bar ethics committees, that's what you do as well, is you note whether there are so many ethics questions coming into your hotline on the same topic that it sounds like it's prime time that you do an ethics opinion on that topic. And wouldn't you know it, AI is one of those. I will also say that even if your state hasn't generated an AI specific ethics opinion, no doubt you may have ethical guidelines available on your state bar website. Have a look. It is the standard of care, and it is the kind of practice pointers. They won't call it best practices because nobody's confident saying that yet. Nobody's really comfortable claiming that they already know what the best practices would be in a particular state when it comes to using AI. But at the very least, there is no such thing as too much guidance when it comes to deciding how to use AI. So I'll just summarize. The opinion talks about and incorporates a lot of the different ethical rules, how we use generative AI. And I like this quote. Here's why I gave you this particular snippet. If you're only using it to generate ideas, that may put you in a position where you require less independent verification or review, especially if you are experienced with the technology. So I'll use ChatGPT as a very quick example here. I have used it enough to know how it generates ideas, the way in which it generates ideas, how if I hit regenerate, it'll give me more ideas. And I also know that I'm soliciting creativity. I'm not soliciting anything that I'm going to cite in a brief. What I'm doing is looking for ideas that inevitably I get enough ideas out of ChatGPT. There's one or more that I say, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Let me think about crafting an argument more along those lines or incorporating that kind of a hypothetical more than I should. So I'm using it as a brainstorming sounding board, not using it for anything I'm going to ever incorporate into a legal document. It would be like talking with a family member, right? When we become lawyers, our families become focus groups. We line them up, we give them our opening statements, our closing arguments, and they give you feedback. That's the kind of thing that Opinion 512 talks about in distinguishing the ways in which lawyers use generative AI for creative outlets rather than simply to cite. So because we're almost at our time, why don't we go to the Q&A? And I see two things in there that I'm going to talk about fairly quickly at the end here. Brent, while I do that, do you want to put up the slide that have our email addresses? Let's do that since we only have 3 minutes left.
Absolutely.
We're going to give you our personal email addresses in case there are other questions that you may want to ask offline. I always find it never fails. There's always something that somebody wants to ask, but not in front of a group. But let me just see. We've got RT Kennedy that says, have you seen the article recently from OpenAI that hallucinations are an inherent part of AI that will never completely disappear? I have seen sentiments like this expressed, that due to the nature of the way in which AI comes to conclusions, that'll always be a risk. Brent, you may have something to say on this question as well.
Absolutely, and this is a great question. I have seen the article on that, and I think I mostly agree with that. I think there are some things that I think it's less of a problem sometimes than it is, and that kind of goes back to sort of the generalist AI models like ChatGPT and Gemini and others that are essentially trained on the entirety of the internet. So obviously not everything on the internet is true. And so it's going to be pulling stuff out of there. And you have to be really careful with your prompting to make sure that you're getting, really good resources to answer your questions. I think that's why when you're looking at something that is custom fit for a criminal justice practitioner, you need to ask where that data set has been trained and where the data is going. And a lot of probably the better tools out there, basically what they do is they take that prompting task away from you. And so it's like, we want you to stick within the four corners of this transcript, of this information or whatever. Are there still possibilities for a large language model to hallucinate even within that restricted access? Yes, but it is dramatically reduced. So that just, a lot of that goes on to sort of which tool you're using. But that's a great question, and I can't say that I disagree with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Harold.
If I may, yeah, no, I agree. And it's just really piggyback off of what Brent says. And I think it goes back to our original point how are you utilizing the generative AI software programming? If you're utilizing it as a tool, then you have a proper vetting process where you're going to have a set of human eyes that is trained to look at it and be able to catch these things. But if you're relying on it solely, yes, you're going to run the dangers of that. But yeah, I think it's just inherent with it. I think we're in the infancy phase, really the honeymoon phase of dealing with AI in our practice area of practice. And so, yeah, I think that's just a given. And I think that's why you have to have those safeguards in place.
Harold, I think as the elected, I may see if you want to tackle the second question we have and the final question. John Black asks, do any of you as practitioners use the AI platforms to reflect on and train the human for their own bias mitigation? For example, reviewing all motions from the office, is there any pattern of implicit cognitive bias, such as hindsight confirmation or FAE? As a thought exercise that allows one to reflect as on individual cultural bias, and even for the platform to reflect on its training data. The one thing I'll ask before I turn it over to Harold, and we all three of us can kind of weigh in on this. Implicit bias is one of the biggest things that we worry about when using AI. Is we worry about the data sets on which it was trained. I mean, if you have something that's in, my folks used to say garbage in, garbage out, and trying to say we weren't allowed to watch certain TV programs. I would say that's a simplified version of the reality that inputting data into a particular AI model is necessarily limiting the way in which it's able to analyze data. Because if it's not trained on a full universe of unbiased data, it's going to sound like an echo chamber on X. It's not going to have access to everything it needs to come up with a totally unbiased conclusion. That's a very skeptical answer, because I think we're better than that as legal practitioners. But in terms of what different motions look like office-wide, I don't know, Harold, if you want to comment on that.
No, I thought that was a thoughtful question. I've read countless articles and scholarly articles on the issue. Even in China, they've actually have an AI prosecutor where it's trying certain traffic related offenses, low level offenses, where it actually determines the charges, the reviews, and it makes the filing decisions. And here's my concern, and I've read various studies on it. Even if you go back to the basic concept of dealing with risk assessment tools, right? Remember, risk assessment tools was the wave of the future, and a lot of people utilize them. But there's studies out there that even the risk assessment tools are implicitly biased in some of the findings and the decisions that are made while utilizing them. And so I think it's a cautionary tale when utilizing AI for training purposes. And once it goes back to Wendy's point, what is the information that it's using? Obviously, as we know, these are self-learning systems. Most of them are self-learning systems, or they're taking information from the web, or they're taking information from certain data systems or confines that are set in the criminal justice system. But the argument can be that the data and the information that is being put into these tools are implicitly biased themselves. I mean, if you want a basic just on geographical location or socioeconomic status, if you look at a certain group of people based on their color, they may be in certain socioeconomic statuses or lack thereof, or they may be confined to certain geographical locations. If you were to look at the South or where I grew up in certain places, people who look like me, we tend to live on the other side of the tracks, the railroad tracks, right? Or it varies in various locations, whether you're in Los Angeles, whether you're in New York, whether you're in Detroit, it varies. And so even if you try to remove some of those racial identifiers, just basing it on race, just thinking about race on a limited purpose, even if you look at identifiers that doesn't necessarily show you the race, even the socioeconomic statuses or locations of individuals or geographical locations could be implicitly biased just by nature of where they are, where they're similarly situated. And so you run the danger of relying on a system to provide training to enhance or to show or to help train prosecutors to not be implicitly biased in their day-to-day decision making. So I think you have to look at it with a cautious eye and be cautious moving forward and looking at it from that standpoint.
I think that's excellent. Brent, any closing comments before we wrap it up?
Just the last thing on that one, and I certainly appreciate everybody giving us a couple extra minutes on this. I agree with both Wendy and Harold on this. I love the idea of sort of feeding in documentation, motion practice, etc., and to sort of look for whatever is there bias, is there inefficiencies, or there's a number of things that AI would be really good at. I don't think there's a current tool that's available. I mean, you could probably, with some very sort of advanced and sophisticated prompting, utilize ChatGPT for that. However, you're running the risk of putting up confidential and CGIS or other client information in there that you probably shouldn't. So I love the idea. I think it's great. It's a way for, regardless of sort of where you sit on the political spectrum as either a prosecutor, defender, or whatever, be able to say, here are the things that I'm concerned about. Take a look at the historical actions of my office to see where we can improve. I think that's great. I don't know of a tool that's available for that right now, but honestly, I think it's a fantastic idea. And again, thank you so much for joining us from my perspective, as a representative of Axon. Thank you for all that you do, regardless of which side of the aisle you sit on. As a criminal justice practitioner, we understand and recognize, the importance of all of the participants in the system. And then I'll kick it over to my co-panelists here.
All right, so we're going to close it up, and I want to, in closing, kind of address the last question from Hillel. How can humans verify the factual accuracy of AI-generated materials? If we had an easy answer for that, we probably would feel a lot more comfortable and confident in consuming the amount of news that we do. We live in a day and age where you question everything. And one of the challenges for us as we learn more about AI, it's the old investigators trick of, you have to know what money really looks like to be able to tell when it's counterfeit. You also need to be familiar enough with different kinds of evidence that you're going to be introducing to know whether there's something that's suspicious. Now, having said that, in terms of answering that last question, it's a learning process for all of us. And I don't know anybody on the call who hasn't seen something AI generated, whether you recognize it or not, and realize that's not a real person. So AI is getting better. So I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but we're going to have to up our game as well and see if we can stay out in front of the learning curve to be able to tell that authenticity and any better. That's where the expert witnesses also make all those big bucks. So we want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fascinating topic. Hopefully the next time we do, we'll be able to give it to you in person somewhere, because these are great questions you all asked at the end. So again, on behalf of myself, Wendy Patrick, and my co-panelists, we hope you've enjoyed this hour, and we wish you the best of luck. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Thank you.